He answered every message the same day it arrived. Every call, every email, every request, every invitation, every question, every complaint, every crisis that anyone in his life decided to bring to him at any hour on any day. His phone never went to voicemail. His door was always open. He prided himself on this. He called it being available, he called it being a good friend, a reliable colleague, a present father, a supportive partner. He was none of those things. He was exhausted. He was a man who had not had an uninterrupted thought in 4 years. A man who could not sit through a meal without his attention being pulled away by something that someone else had decided was urgent. A man who had become so woven into the needs and demands and schedules and crises of everyone around him that he no longer had any clear sense of where they ended and he began. His name was David, and he came to understand the truth of his situation not through therapy or self-help or a dramatic moment of crisis, but through a single afternoon. His daughter, who was 7 years old, came to find him while he was on his phone in the garden. She stood next to him for a while. He held up one finger without looking at her. She waited. He held up the finger again. She sat down in the grass and waited some more. He finished the call and looked at her and said, "Sorry, sweetheart, what did you need?" She looked at him with the uncomplicated honesty that only children possess and said, "Nothing now, Dad. I just wanted to show you something, but it does not matter anymore." He asked what she had wanted to show him. She pointed at a butterfly that was no longer on the flower where it had been. It was gone. He had missed it. He had been available to everyone. And he had missed it. That afternoon changed something in David. Not immediately, not dramatically, not with a motivational speech or a new system or a productivity hack. With a quiet, growing understanding that being reachable to everyone had made him unreachable to himself. And that everything he actually cared about lived in the territory he had surrendered. The Stoics had a name for what David had lost. They called it the inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius used that phrase to describe the interior space where your values, your clarity, your peace, and your truest self reside. A place that nothing outside you can enter without your permission. But here is the truth that the Stoics were unsparing about. The inner citadel does not maintain itself. You have to protect it. Actively, deliberately, consistently. You have to build habits so quiet and so firm that the world learns where your boundary is. Not by announcement. By practice. There are 8 silent habits that save your inner peace. 8 practices that the Stoics lived and that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten in the noise of constant connection and relentless availability. Each one costs something. Each one gives back more than it costs. Begin. Habit 1. Guard your mornings like your life depends on it. In the winter of 1848, a 39-year-old lawyer in Springfield, Illinois established a rule that his law partners found eccentric and his clients found inconvenient. He would not see anyone or discuss any business matter before 9 in the morning. Not because he was lazy. He was the opposite of lazy. He was at his desk before dawn every single morning, working in uninterrupted silence on whatever required the deepest thinking. Before the partners arrived, before the clients came, before the mail was sorted, before anyone knew he was there, he had already done the work that mattered most. He had protected the hours when his mind was freshest and most capable from the demands that would claim every other hour of his day. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And that quiet morning discipline that looked from the outside like mere preference was actually the engine of some of the most consequential thinking of the 19th century. Lincoln later said that he did his best thinking in the early hours not because he was a morning person by nature, but because the morning was the only time that belonged entirely to him. Every other hour he belonged to someone else. The morning was the hour he could not afford to give away. This is the first and most important silent habit. Guard your mornings. Not from productivity, not to grind more hours out of the day, not to get ahead of the competition. But because the morning is the only time in each day when the world has not yet arrived with its claims. Before the messages, before the calls, before the requests, before the news, before the noise, before the thousand small emergencies that other people will generate between now and nightfall. There is a window. It is small. It closes fast. And what you do inside it determines an enormous amount about what is available to you for the rest of the day. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations in the early morning. Every page, every reflection, every philosophical examination of who he was and who he intended to be, written before the empire needed him. Because he understood that if he waited until the empire was done with him, there would be nothing left to write with. Seneca made the same practice explicit in his letters to Lucilius. Gather yourself, he wrote, before you are scattered. The scattering begins the moment you become reachable. The gathering happens only in the space before that moment. Do not negotiate with this habit. Do not leave the morning open because someone might need you. Someone will always need you. The morning is not for them. The morning is the one daily practice of self-possession that everything else depends on. Protect it the way Lincoln protected it. Like your actual life depends on it. Because the version of you that has had time to think before the world arrives is a categorically different and more capable version than the one who woke up and immediately began reacting. David the man from the opening began here. He started by not looking at his phone until he had been awake for 1 hour. Just that. 1 hour. By the end of the first week, he had had more original thoughts than he had experienced in the previous 6 months. Habit 2. Let some things go unanswered. There was a painter in 19th century New England named Winslow Homer who was by his early 40s one of the most critically celebrated artists in America. He lived alone on the coast of Maine in a studio he had built himself at Prout's Neck. He had no telephone obviously, and he managed his correspondence with a deliberateness that struck everyone who knew him as eccentric, bordering on rude. He simply did not answer letters he did not feel like answering. Not out of arrogance. Out of a clear philosophical understanding that every response was a conversation, and every conversation was an exchange of attention, and attention was the one thing he could not afford to spend carelessly. His sister-in-law, who occasionally handled his affairs, wrote to him once about a gallery dealer who was anxious to hear from him regarding an exhibition. Homer wrote back to her, "I thank you for your kind interest in my affairs, but as I am perfectly happy, I do not care for any more excitement." He was not being dismissive of the gallery or the opportunity. He was being honest about the economy of his attention. More correspondence, more meetings, more obligations meant less of what had produced everything the gallery wanted to show in the first place. He produced some of the most enduring American paintings of the 19th century in that studio at Prout's Neck. He produced them because he protected his attention ruthlessly from the claims of a world that would gladly have consumed all of it. The modern compulsion to respond to everything immediately is not a personality trait. It is a trained behavior reinforced by technology designed specifically to make the absence of response feel socially dangerous. The little red notification. The unread message count, the seen receipt that tells the sender you received and did not respond. These are engineering decisions made by people who understood that the fear of social disapproval is one of the most powerful motivators available. And they use that fear to colonize your attention. The Stoic response to this is not rudeness. It is clarity. Seneca wrote to Lucilius about the necessity of being selective with both your time and your responses. Avoid those who will depress your spirits and make you doubt yourself, he wrote, and avoid those who seek only to consume your energy without return. He was not talking about enemies. He was talking about the ordinary drain of too many conversations about too little that leaves a person feeling scattered and empty at the end of the day without being able to name exactly why. The silent habit here is this. Not every message requires a response. Not every question requires an answer from you today. Not every person who wants your attention deserves it at the moment they request it. This is not cruelty. It is stewardship. You are the steward of your own attention. And attention poured out carelessly on everything is attention unavailable for anything. Homer understood this. He let the letters sit. He painted. And the paintings outlasted every letter he ever declined to answer. Habit 3. Create space that belongs only to you. In 1845, the philosopher Henry David Thoreau walked into the woods near Walden Pond and built a small cabin. He was not running from the world. He was running towards something the world kept interrupting. He had noticed something about his own life that disturbed him. Every time he had a thought that felt important, something arrived to interrupt it before it could complete itself. A visitor, a conversation, an obligation, a social norm that required his participation. He could not think his best thoughts in the presence of constant social claim. He needed space. Not distance from people he loved. Physical, psychological, temporal space that belonged entirely to him, and that the social world could not enter without explicit invitation. He spent 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days at Walden. He wrote one of the most influential works in American literature. He came back. But he came back changed. Because he had discovered in that space what the constant presence of social obligation had been costing him. Not his time. His self. The person who knew what he actually thought when the noise stopped. The person who had opinions that had never been formed in reaction to anyone else's. The person who could sit with a question long enough to actually answer it. Most people have never met that person. Because they have never created the space for that person to exist. Marcus Aurelius had a phrase for this space. He called it retreating into yourself. You can go into yourself whenever you choose, he wrote, for there is no retreat more peaceful or less troubled than your own soul. But he was careful about what this required. The retreat into yourself is not automatic. It requires the physical and temporal conditions of solitude. Actual aloneness. Actual silence. Actual space that no one else can enter. In the modern world, this requires active construction. You have to build the space. You have to protect it. You have to refuse the social guilt that arrives every time you close a door and do not open it for an hour. Because the social guilt is real and it is constant, and it will tell you that closing the door is selfish, that being unavailable is unkind, that needing space is a character flaw. It is not a character flaw. It is a necessity. The person who never retreats into themselves does not know themselves. And the person who does not know themselves cannot give anything of genuine value to anyone else. They can give compliance, they can give availability, they can give the performance of presence. But not the real thing. Because the real thing lives in the space they never gave themselves. David began carving out 45 minutes on Saturday mornings that belonged only to him. No phone, no family obligations, no email. He sat with his coffee and his notebook, and no agenda. By the third Saturday, he described something he had not experienced in years. The sensation of his own mind settling. Like sediment in disturbed water finally coming to rest. He had been so constantly stirred that he had forgotten what it felt like to be still. That stillness was not nothing. It was the foundation of everything. Habit 4. Choose who has access to your energy. In the court of the Emperor Nero in 1st century Rome, there was a man named Seneca who had spent years navigating one of the most psychologically treacherous environments in human history. He was brilliant and educated and politically connected, and he had used all of those qualities to survive in proximity to a man who was unpredictable, dangerous, and capable of ordering his death on a whim. And in that environment, Seneca developed an insight about human energy that he returned to again and again in his letters. Not everyone deserves access to your interior life, he wrote. Some people take what you give them and use it well. Others take what you give them and are simply hungrier afterward. The second category he called the tub of the crowd, the mass of people whose company leaves you feeling not replenished but emptied. His advice was not to eliminate all social contact. It was to be extraordinarily selective about who received the kind of attention that costs something real. Because there is a difference between the attention you give to a conversation about nothing and the attention you give to someone who matters. And most people are spending most of their highest quality attention on the former. Think about the last week. How many conversations did you have that left you feeling genuinely enriched? How many left you feeling vaguely depleted without being able to say exactly why? The depleting conversations are not always negative. Sometimes they are pleasant. Sometimes they are with people you genuinely like. But they are conversations that take without giving back. That consume attention without producing anything of value in exchange. That leave you at the end of them slightly less yourself than you were at the beginning. The Stoic practice here is not misanthropy. It is discernment. Epictetus taught his students to ask one simple question before entering any sustained social engagement. Will this person make me better or will they make me less? Not whether they are good people. not whether they deserve your time in some abstract moral sense. Whether the exchange leaves you more capable or less capable of being who you are trying to be. This is the silent habit of energy management. Not announcing to people that you are no longer available. Not making dramatic declarations about protecting your peace. Simply and quietly. Being less reachable to the people and conversations that cost more than they give. And more present, more open, more genuinely engaged with the ones that do the opposite. Homer did not explain his unanswered letters to the people who sent them. He simply gave his best attention to the work and let the residue of what was left find its way to correspondence. That ordering was the whole of his philosophy. The work first. Everything else with whatever remained. Habit 5. Stop explaining yourself. There was a woman in early 20th century America named Georgia who moved to the New Mexico desert and painted. She had been a celebrated figure in New York art circles. She had been married to one of the most influential figures in American photography. She had been at the center of a world that placed enormous value on her opinions, her presence, her social participation. And she left. She moved to an adobe house in Abiquiu, New Mexico, and she painted the desert. And when people asked her why she had left New York, she gave short answers. Because I wanted to. Because it was where I needed to be. Because the light was right. She did not defend the decision, she did not justify it, she did not offer the elaborate explanation that would have satisfied the people who found her choice baffling or disappointing. She just made the choice and lived it. Georgia O'Keeffe became one of the most important visual artists of the 20th century. In the desert, in the silence, in the space she had stopped explaining herself into. The compulsion to explain yourself to everyone who questions your choices is one of the most costly invisible drains on inner peace. And it is almost entirely driven by the need for approval from people who did not ask for that responsibility, and cannot actually give you what you are seeking from them. When you explain yourself at length, you are doing several things simultaneously. You are signaling that their opinion of your choice matters more than your confidence in it. You are inviting them into a negotiation you should have closed before it started. You are spending energy defending a decision instead of living it. And you are creating an opening for their doubt to become your doubt. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome, and he answered to essentially no one in a formal sense. And still he wrote reminders to himself about this. Not to seek the good opinion of others, he wrote, for that is not in your control. Not to explain yourself into a position you have already earned the right to occupy. The Stoics called this practicing indifference to external judgment. Not indifference to genuine wisdom offered by people who deserve your respect. Indifference to the reflexive questioning of people who are uncomfortable with choices they do not share. There is a simple test. If someone questions a choice you have made, ask yourself one question. Does this person have standing in my life to weigh in on this? Not do they mean well. Not are they intelligent. Do they have standing? Have they earned the right to this conversation through their relationship with you, through their demonstrated wisdom, through their track record of giving you counsel that served your actual best interests? If yes, consider what they say carefully. If no, say thank you for sharing that with me and change nothing. The explanation you owe them is brief. The explanation you owe yourself is honest and complete. But you do not owe the honest and complete version to everyone who asks. Georgia O'Keeffe knew this. She kept the desert. She kept the light. She kept the work. She gave the short answer and went back inside. Habit 6. Be slow to react and slow to engage. In 1905, a young man named Albert was working as a patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland. He was not famous. He was not yet a professor or a published theorist, or a figure of any consequence in the scientific establishment. He was a 26-year-old clerk examining other people's inventions for 8 hours a day. And in the remaining hours he was thinking. Not talking about thinking. Not explaining his thinking to colleagues who could not yet follow it. Not performing the appearance of intellectual work for an audience. Just thinking. Privately, slowly, without urgency. He let his ideas develop at the pace they required. He did not rush to publish before the ideas were ready because he needed the scientific community's validation. He did not share his developing theories in the seminars and discussions of the Berne scientific circle because the ideas needed to exist in his own mind first before they could survive contact with other minds. He protected the development of his thinking from the social pressure that turns tentative insight into defended position before the insight is ready to bear that weight. In 1905, Albert Einstein published 4 papers that changed physics forever. The theory of special relativity, the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, the mass-energy equivalence. 4 papers in 1 year from a man who had spent years in apparently unremarkable silence. The silence was not unremarkable. The silence was the work. This is the silent habit of slow reaction. Not the performance of calm, not the pretense of not caring. The genuine philosophical practice of allowing things to develop inside you before they are exposed to the friction of the external world. Most people bring their half-formed thoughts to other people too soon. They share ideas before the ideas are strong enough to survive sharing. They ask for opinions before they have formed their own. They react to situations before they have understood them. And the result is that their thinking is permanently shaped by other people's responses rather than by their own developing clarity. Epictetus had a practice he described as the pause. Between stimulus and response, he said, there is a space. In that space lies your freedom and your growth. He was not talking about a pause of minutes. Sometimes he was talking about a pause of days. The practice of not reacting immediately to things that seem to require immediate reaction. Of letting the first wave of feeling pass before deciding whether to engage. Of asking, is this actually my business, and does my engagement here actually improve anything, or does it just burn energy that belongs to something else? Marcus Aurelius applied this to every dimension of his life. He described being slow to speak, slow to commit, slow to judge, slow to condemn. Not because he was indecisive. Because he understood that the world loses nothing when you take your time. And you lose something irreplaceable every time you react before you are ready. Einstein in that Berne patent office was practicing this at the highest possible level. Letting the ideas be what they needed to be in the space where no one could reach them. Before they were ready to be shared. Before they were ready to become what they became. Habit 7. Detach from outcomes you cannot control. In the summer of 1519, a young Portuguese explorer named Ferdinand set sail from Spain with 5 ships and 270 men. His goal was to find a western route to the Spice Islands. He did not know how long it would take. He did not know whether it was possible. He did not know whether he would survive. He only knew which direction to sail and that he was going to sail in that direction until the voyage was either complete or it ended him. Ferdinand Magellan sailed for 3 years. He lost 4 of his 5 ships. He lost 232 of his 270 men. He was killed in a battle in the Philippines, and never completed the voyage himself. The one remaining ship, the Victoria, with 18 survivors, completed the first circumnavigation of the Earth, and returned to Spain with enough spice in its hold to pay for the entire expedition and turn a profit. Magellan did not complete the voyage. The voyage was completed. The distinction matters. Because Magellan's piece, the thing that allowed him to keep sailing after losing 4 ships and 232 men, was not certainty about the outcome. It was complete commitment to the direction and complete release of what he could not control. He could not control the storms. He could not control the disease. He could not control the mutinies. He could not control the battle that killed him. He could control where he pointed the ship. The Stoics called this the discipline of desire. Wanting only what is within your power to actually have. Directing your full energy at the quality of your effort, and releasing completely your attachment to outcomes that other forces beyond you will ultimately determine. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in a passage that has become one of the most quoted in the Meditations. Confine yourself to the present. Do not add to your difficulties by pulling in the anxiety of future outcomes that have not yet arrived. Be entirely present in the quality of what you are doing right now. And let what follows follow. This habit is perhaps the most difficult of all the silent habits because the modern world is structured entirely around outcome metrics. How many, how fast, how much, how successful, how viral, how recognized. The question is always about the result, never about the quality of the direction. And people who organize their peace around results have no peace because results are not in their control. The Victoria came home. Magellan did not. Both were part of the same voyage. And the voyage was worth making. David came to understand this slowly over the months after his butterfly moment with his daughter. He began to practice releasing his grip on how his days were received by other people. Whether they appreciated his availability, whether they noticed his effort, whether they gave him credit for what he was building. He focused on the direction. Am I pointed at what matters to me? Am I spending today in a way that the person I want to be would recognize? That question replaced the question of whether anyone was approving of the answer. And the replacement changed everything. Habit 8. Make inner peace a practice, not a destination. There was an old Zen teacher named Shunryu Suzuki who came from Japan to San Francisco in 1959 and spent the rest of his life teaching meditation to American students. He is best remembered for one sentence from his book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. But what fewer people know is the way he described his own practice in his final years when he was very sick and very near death. A student asked him whether after all his decades of practice he had achieved enlightenment. He laughed and said, "I am a very poor Zen student. I am still working on it every day." Not because he had failed. Because he understood something that his students needed to hear. Inner peace is not a destination you arrive at and then occupy permanently. It is a practice. A daily returning. A daily choosing of the habits that protect the space where peace lives. And the choosing never stops being necessary. Even for the master. Even for the teacher. Even for the person who has been at it for 50 years. Because the world does not stop generating noise just because you have gotten better at protecting yourself from it. The demands keep coming. The people who want your attention keep wanting it. The notifications keep arriving. The crises keep presenting themselves with the urgency they always claim to possess. And every single day you choose again. Do I give this my attention or do I protect what is behind it? The Stoics did not promise that this practice became easy. They promised that it became more natural. Marcus Aurelius was at this practice every morning for 20 years. He wrote the same reminders to himself in year 19 that he had written in year 1. Not because he had not progressed. Because he understood that progress in this practice is not the elimination of the daily effort. It is the deepening of the daily willingness. The willingness to keep choosing the morning before the phone. The willingness to let some things go unanswered. The willingness to create and protect the space that belongs only to you. The willingness to guard who has access to what you most deeply are. The willingness to stop explaining yourself to people who do not have standing. The willingness to be slow and deliberate where the world wants you reactive and immediate. The willingness to release the outcomes you cannot control and find your peace entirely in the quality of your direction. The willingness to do all of this not once, not for 31 days, not until the motivation runs out. Every day. As a practice. As the ongoing project of being a person who has not surrendered their interior life to the noise. Shunryu Suzuki died in 1971. His students described his final days as extraordinarily peaceful. Not because peace had been achieved and locked in. Because he had been practicing it every day for decades. And the practice was so deeply embedded in who he was that even dying could not interrupt it. That is what the silent habits build. Not a state. A person. The kind of person whose inner peace is not contingent on external conditions. Not on whether people respond the way you hoped. Not on whether the day goes the way you planned. Not on whether you are appreciated, recognized, approved, or understood. The kind of person who has built something inside themselves that the world cannot reach. That is the inner citadel Marcus Aurelius wrote about. Not a metaphor. An actual constructed thing. Built one silent habit at a time. Over weeks and months and years of daily practice. David did not become a monk. He did not move to the desert or disconnect from the world or leave his phone in a drawer forever. He remains reachable. But on his terms. He guards his mornings, he lets some things go unanswered, he has a space that belongs only to him, he has become quieter about who receives his deepest attention, he has stopped explaining choices he does not owe explanations for, he has learned to pause before reacting, he has released his grip on outcomes, he wakes up every morning and chooses the practice again. And one morning last spring his daughter found him sitting in the garden without his phone. She sat next to him. They watched a butterfly together for a long time without saying anything. He did not miss it. He has not forgotten that he almost did. That is the whole of what is being offered here. Not a system. Not a schedule. Not a 30-day challenge. A philosophy. A set of daily choices about what deserves your attention and what does not. About what belongs to the world and what belongs entirely to you. About who you are when you stop performing availability and start practicing presence. The world will not stop asking. It never stops asking. The question is whether you have built something inside yourself strong enough to determine how you answer. The Stoics built it. Marcus Aurelius built it in the chaos of empire. Seneca built it in the proximity of danger. Epictetus built it in the absolute conditions of slavery. They did not wait for the world to become quieter. They became quieter inside the noise. That is available to you. Not someday. In the morning before your phone reaches you. In the pause before you respond. In the door you close and do not open for one uninterrupted hour. In the butterfly you stay present long enough to actually see. Begin there. Everything else follows. Please subscribe for more.